For over a decade, Craig Green has been one of London's most critically successful designers, growing quickly to profits off of the back of the newly successful Men's Fashion Week in London. But because of a decision totally out of his hands, and because of the pandemic, the publicity around the brand has reduced significantly. So, the question for Craig Green today: will he be able to survive? This video is sponsored by Skillshare. I've been looking to improve my journalistic skills to make better videos for you guys to enjoy, and it's been very easy to do that on Skillshare, with my favorite class being this one, Editing and Proofreading Masterclass by Nite L. But while I was there, I noticed that they had classes on marketing too, so exactly what I predominantly talk about in my videos, and they do have some great topics around understanding branding for your own company, i.e. not doing something that will be off-brand and then end up damaging yourself in the process, which you'll understand why I said that later on in the video. But they also have videos on things like productivity, freelance, and entrepreneurship too, if that is the reason that you have come to my channel. So if you are wanting to learn more about that from their various videos over the summer, Skillshare can turn your I want tos into I made it happens. So if you are interested in giving Skillshare a go yourself, the first 500 people to use my link in the description will receive a 1-month free trial of Skillshare. Get started today. So thank you to Skillshare for sponsoring this video. When Craig Green graduated Central St. Martin's in the spring of 2012 with this collection, he could hardly have known the journey that his brand would go on through the endlessly changing London Fashion Week system. As a graduate collection, this was incredibly strong. It was very fresh, so incredibly original, and thanks to this interview from One Granary, which is the CSM reporting outlet, we know that he had started at Central St. Martin's with fine arts. With that said, it was clear from the outset that he was coming to fashion from more of a fine art perspective and possessed the ability to translate his inspiration into something that was uniquely branded, which is often far more important than fine art than it is in fashion, which is always evolving. This can actually be seen in his work for Christopher Shannon in Spring-Summer 2012 very clearly, as I pointed out in my Christopher Shannon video, and in this patchwork denim piece for Topman in 2009, both of which obviously Craig Green coded before the brand had even existed. However, importantly, at this same time, the landscape of Fashion Week in London was changing fundamentally. For menswear specifically, since Autumn-Winter 06, of which there are no photos, Topman had begun New Gen Men in collaboration with London Fashion Week as part of a campaign to bolster UK design talent in menswear. And it was really working, primarily for their incubator show named Man that displayed the finest new menswear talent in London. In their first show, all the names aren't really known, but there was likely Kim Jones and Meadham Kirchhoff. In their second show came cassette player Carol Euler and Topman Design, and it would go on to spawn massive names like J.W. Anderson, all showing at a show called Man, which had begun as a singular show during the Women's Wear Week. Menswear in London had existed before, obviously, but menswear had always just been tacked on to the Women's Wear London Fashion Week in September as a singular day, usually referred to as Menswear Day, which often overlapped with Milan Fashion Week, so never really received decent attention. Quote, London's menswear was becoming increasingly oversubscribed and faced ongoing scheduling issues. It was out of sync with the rest of the menswear schedule, by which he's referring to Paris and Milan, who already had a designated men's fashion week before the couture schedule already, and it clashed with the beginning of the women's shows in Milan, making attendance by buyers and press difficult. As a result, exactly in January 2012, just as Craig Green was graduating, it was announced that London Fashion Week would launch a men's fashion weekend, which was actually a 3-day weekend named London Collections Men, in June off of the back of the success of The Man Show. June was chosen here as it placed London Men's Week immediately before Milan Men's Week, so while the men's editors were in Europe, they were more likely to visit for London Collections Men. This is a surprisingly important factor for the story, which we will definitely be getting back to. But for now, know that this was a brilliant decision from the promotion of menswear in London. To quote Gordon Richardson, design director of Topman, he said, No longer shoehorned into one condensed hectic day, the newly established London menswear collections over 3 glorious days now had the space to breathe, flourish, and generate the buzz that will put its talented rising men's fashion stars firmly on the international fashion map. As such, the most anticipated show of that season was the Man Show. The buzz was incredible, and it really lived up to the expectation. Spring/Summer 13 was a smash success. Astrid Anderson, Aggie and Sam, and Sean Samson all showed in the Man Show to great acclaim, and though he wasn't widely known yet for Rise Menswear, which was like the preliminary to the Man Show, Craig Green produced a fashion film with Zoe Hitchen directing and Harry Lambert styling, though it seems the video is lost to time, with, as far as I could find, only these images remaining from the collection. One from a blog named Style and Then Some, and the others taken from the website of his knitwear collaborator Helen Lawrence, who he worked with for the next 3 collections. By Autumn/Winter 13, both London Collections Men and the Man Show were the absolute hottest ticket to have, and Craig Green was the new name on the list, joining Astrid Anderson and Aggie and Sam. But it was very clear right from the outset that Craig Green was truly something special. He had importantly continued nearly all the themes from both his graduate collection and seemingly from the secretive Spring/Summer 13 collection. Namely, he continued the theme of manual labor, which in my opinion is the single most important signifier of the Craig Green brand, for it seems ingrained in almost every aspect of his work, not just the visual language. From his inspiration of hard graft imagery as shown in his graduate sketchbook, to actually labor-intensive methods of construction, things like tie-dye, which is done by hand, showing open seams, and even the woodwork-inspired headpieces, all of which express the sense of physical labor. The translation of his original graduate show with these abstract headpieces with genuinely wearable clothes to boot, he walked that line between interesting visual discussion points and commercially viable garments perfectly in a way that's so difficult to do in menswear. His work was visually arresting, and because of this, he got the free promotion that sometimes follows that, especially famously from the Daily Mail, who ran the headline "What a Plank" in reference to Green's work, as well as from David Gandy, who openly insulted Green's work on Alan Carr's Chatty Man. I did find a clip and it only has Spanish subtitles, so he says that Green's work makes him sick, that he would refuse to wear it, and that no one wants to look like a shed. But in fairness, he is egged on a bit by Alan Carr, who calls it crap. Which, as bad as it sounds, is exactly what the showpieces are for, to force public discussion. These are huge platforms of promotion that absolutely could not have existed without the initial surprise of the headpieces. But fortunately, because they were just showpieces, to real potential buyers, it was clear that even after initial interest, the clothes behind them were saleable, evidenced fortunately by this blog, flyingadolescent.wordpress.com, that claims to have tried on Autumn/Winter 13 Craig Green in other shop and that it had mostly sold out. This, of course, was only heightened for Spring/Summer 14 and saw him receive some of the biggest press of any new designer at the time. To quote Isabella Burley for Dazed, his silhouettes were distorted, prints were hand-dyed, and his hems were left raw. Like last season, Craig gave us a strong visual, but this time he created this strange rhythm on the runway where block collars of navy, black, and white were set aside bright, psychedelic prints. It was a spectacular show and reinforced his position as one of London's most visionary menswear designers. By Autumn/Winter 14, in the tradition of the Man Show, he showed his most commercial collection to date with heavy emphasis on bags and hats, both of course decent money spinners for newer designers. It was also in this collection that they debuted their long hanging ties for the first time, now extending that idea of workmanship to the consumer as the pieces were newly adaptable. And from memory, it seemed that commercially this was really working. I remember shopping this collection in Dover Street Market in London and the sales assistant telling me that it was doing particularly well, which we then joked must be why he wasn't having sample sales as we had both been looking out for them. In short, by this point already, there was a tribe of loyal customers following his work and clearly already buying. In 2014, he bought out his own company to establish as a private limited company, calling himself as a debtor to a £20,000 loan and finishing the year at minus £18,000, which may seem bad, but actually for a business of this size is
Not that unusual at all.
In fact, his finances from here on only seem to improve over time, and as early as 2016 saw profits able to be distributed to shareholders, of which there was only one, Craig himself. So, what happened between 2014 and 2016 to see this kind of growth? Marketing, obviously. This began with his Spring/Summer 15 show that was a massive critical success for the ability to really rethink fashion by way of transformable garments, taking that sense of handwork from the inspiration onto the consumer in a way that felt so fresh and even heightened from the previous collection. This was a huge turning point for the brand. Up until this point, few brands have been able to come out of the Man show and find the same kind of critical success afterwards simply because the Man show itself was the big draw. So usually a dip in public attention can be tricky to navigate. But in contrast, Green immediately saw a win as the Emerging Designer of the Year at the end of the year 2014, then was a finalist for the LVMH prize just months after. So, not only did Craig immediately overcome this hurdle, he seemed to thrive in it, as by January 2015, the Autumn-Winter 15 collection was used in their first campaign and shot by Nick Knight, which, by the time it arrived in stores, saw that they took a window in Dover Street Market where the garments began selling out endlessly. Basically, Craig Green had made a hero product in his padded jackets that were well branded, in the know, and actively desirable to the early adopters of fashion. And, as is always the case, when you begin that journey of having a commercially successful product that's repeatable for early adopters on the product lifecycle chart, as long as the demand is met, it can be a great financial source for the company as awareness and demand grows. Furthermore, this kind of garment cash cow are extremely hard to come by in fashion. Most brands rely on shoes, bags, or sunglasses for that kind of ongoing demand for exactly that reason. So to see such a young brand hit it out of the park like this so early on is a great sign that they will see longevity. From this point on season, his work developed, with long strings, changeable garments, and light quilting, all with the same inspiration of workwear and labor, various different religious garbs, Japanese traditional clothing, and even militaria, which all culminated in this great melting pot where the audience was excited to see what Green would produce while he still maintained a base level of garments that were able to meet the immediate consumer demand. This continued from the Spring/Summer 15 all the way through to Spring/Summer 17 when it didn't stop, but it only seemed to improve. In this collection, he introduced prints in these types of tile-esque patterns and more importantly introduced roping details. Again, he had hit on another incredibly desirable design element in his work that was transformable to multiple garments. Where the long ties had been able to be used on bags, jackets, and trousers, these ropes were also used on jackets and trousers, and most importantly, when the collection came into stores, these t-shirts. Though I don't believe they were ever on the catwalk, I remember them coming to Farfetch back in the day and selling out regularly. Though while I remember them from Farfetch, it was actually Mr. Porter that launched them alongside denim jackets and hoodies as a core range for this season as it came to retail. Obviously, we've discussed core collections many times on this channel, usually using the marketing funnel, as it easily visualizes the idea that catwalks or promotion is meant to mill attention, while cash cows are there to make sales. It transfers the person from a consumer of marketing to a customer of goods. As such, it can be exactly the kind of sales needed to keep a fashion business afloat, which for a small to medium enterprise, or SME as Craig Green is, these can really make or break a company. Of course, Green had had his jackets before, but now this was an even more accessible garment to the masses, translating his design work into something that can be worn, and thanks to a lower price point, afforded by many more people. Effectively, while the jackets made decent sales, the t-shirts are an entry point product perfect to inaugurate consumers with low-cost, low-risk garments. Of course, this core collection was truly successful. So much so that variations on these t-shirts are still available to this day, as are other core products like sweatshirts. So, now for themes at a retail level, they were working with multiple transferable elements that can be carried over for season-on-season sales. They had quilted jackets, ties and straps, ropes and by extension eyelets, and even patchworking, either in the sense that he began with Topman in 2009, which had been transformed into pieces like these, or in the sense of connectable pieces of clothing. These kinds of season-on-season theme repeats in retail keep past purchases relevant to the consumer, raising desirability because of the longevity, and makes the brand look consistent and reliable, which of course it is. The quilted jackets at least have been present since Spring-Summer 15, and he just showed Spring-Summer 25. 10 years of consistency is just good for all that's involved. So, from the commercial side, things were really promising, certainly matching the demand accrued from the catwalks. But the demand wasn't only coming from the catwalks. Obviously, the catwalks offer Green the most free promotion from the buzz that it generated. But an unignorable part of the Craig Green marketing strategy thus far has been their print and even video campaigns. Since the Autumn-Winter 15 campaign from Nick Knight, Green collaborated with top stylists and photographers to capture the essence of each of the shows. Mostly featuring the showpieces instead of commercial garments at this stage, these campaigns had the goal of raising awareness of the brand as opposed to selling one specific product, as you may see in something like a Gucci campaign where they're holding the bag front and center. Instead, these images were meant to evoke a feeling. Of course, given the expected budget, they weren't widely distributed, but they were smartly and selectively distributed to magazines that an early adopter may pick up, telling us that they knew who their customer was. Again, I don't have a timeline on this because it's just from my memory, but I believe I remember seeing this campaign for Autumn-Winter 17 either in Dazed or 032C and just losing my mind because it was so beautiful and such a departure from his previous campaigns. But nothing could prepare me for the Spring-Summer 18 campaign that went viral of Green setting his sculptures on fire. Constructed by set designer David Curtis Ring, who began working with Craig during his Man Show days, and captured by photographer Dan Tobin Smith, both of whom had worked on his Autumn-Winter 17 campaign, the emotional piece added a sense of destruction to Green's work that previously had been more about construction, working with one's hands. And for this reason, it was just so powerful. It soon became the most successful campaign that Craig Green the brand had released, even to this day, and was very well timed as well, considering his debut for the Moncler Genius line had only just been released mere weeks before. A collaboration that would go on for 5 seasons, each to much acclaim, which both again employed David Curtis Ring and Dan Tobin Smith. By all accounts, Green should have been on top of the fashion world. Commercially they were, critically they were, collaboratively they were, and even in publicity they produced some of the most exciting catwalks and print ads to come out of London. But there was one aspect totally out of Green's control: the dwindling star of London Collections men. There's a lot of factors to this, of course. Just the fact that interest had died down after the initial buzz, the fact that Christopher Bailey had left Burberry and was being replaced by Gorbetti, which saw less interest in London fashion in general, and because by this point, Topman, who had been the major sponsor of London Collections men, was now heading towards bankruptcy, had to pull out by Autumn-Winter 18. All of this and more leading to significantly less interest in the season as a whole, which meant by proxy, less press for Craig Green. Of course, Green could have pulled out too, many designers already had, but London had sort of now cemented itself as the home of creative menswear, so there just wasn't a more fitting place for them to show. This resulted in a bit of a risky standing for the brand, as it did for all brands showing in London Collections men. It had nothing to do with Craig's talent or their excellent world building, but there was now a new risk that was totally out of their control. I'd also like to add that it really wasn't London Collection's men's fault either. It's not their fault Topman had to pull out at the same time as their other big crowd puller of Burberry, and we in England do have a very long history of horrendous government funding of fashion. So without the Arcadia Group funding, London Collection's men was just as out in the rain as everyone else. Of course, Green was still widely celebrated in this time. He won the Designer of the Year award in 2016, 2017 and 2018 and was the guest designer at Pitti Uomo for Spring-Summer 19, all of which would have helped equalise the reducing international press from London Collection's men, as would his own plan to move to Paris Fashion Week for the next season of Autumn-Winter 20. But while the risk was looming and he was doing everything he could to fight against it, the real financial turning point came in an incredibly fortunate collaboration. Adidas. Beginning just as the pandemic did in January 2020, Craig Green and Adidas would begin a collaboration that's still ongoing to this day, but was so successful even at that time that it contributed to their profits doubling between 2020 and 2021, a very well-deserved improvement on their bottom line. And yet, while Craig Green had tried to escape from the dwindling London Collection's men, he would soon be subject to one extra factor totally out of his control. Obviously, this was the pandemic, which, as he admits in this interview with Tim Blanks, put him through a period of uncertainty in which he ultimately would return to London. Quote, "I think we're still in that period of not knowing what's going on and not really knowing what's right." Just on top of that, in the same year of 2020, both London Collection's men and London Fashion Week went gender neutral, renamed to London Fashion Week June, which is when Craig Green usually shows, and London Fashion Week September. This was obviously so well-intentioned to move London Fashion Week forward politically, but fundamentally, neutralizing both fashion weeks was a mistake. It removed the identifier for each week and caused just a whole list of problems. I'm going to go over the list that I could think of now. Firstly, the 2 weeks now are competing with each other. If they're both meant for the same fashion season and both intended for the same audience, one will always be better than the other. Secondly, this makes it difficult for everyone to understand what they're getting. For customers to search for clothing that fits their personalities, they do need some kind of categorization, otherwise it's just a list of names, and even those aren't revealed until the last minute. Third, it's difficult for buyers, who mostly still buy on the binary, especially in countries that are less progressive, because it just helps them to know what to buy and when, i.e. if they spend all of their budget in June and miss something in September, that's really a problem for the buyers. Fourth, it's difficult for designers to know which fashion week to present in, especially if their clothes are not intended to be non-binary. Fifth, it's difficult for the press. Most press we follow these days is fed through influencers or key opinion leaders who largely pay for their own trips. So buying 2 trips instead of 1 is prohibiting to most, and even to those who can afford it, say the Vogue and Burst writers, then it's at least annoying to go twice, paying all of that money for 2 of effectively the same thing. Sixth, it's difficult for their own PR department. Trying to promote both fashion weeks instead of just the one splits their manpower. Of course, it simply cannot make the same kind of splash if it is divided. And seventh, because of all of these things, it puts a huge strain on London Collection's June because it's just not as easily connected to the bigger fashion weeks. Literally, the reason fashion seasons work is because of proximity. If you're already in Milan for Milan Fashion Week, then going the next day to Paris is not difficult, you may as well. But if you're a women's wear reporter, 3 days in June with no onward journey is far less worth it than a September that connects London, Milan and Paris in one. Frankly, London is nowhere near as powerful alone as it is combined with Paris and Milan. In fairness, if they had combined the 2 periods into one 8-day-long festa, theoretically a non-binary week could work. But this hypothetical schedule on the screen now is totally impossible. This time is, in reality, taken by New York, and before that it's taken by Copenhagen, so there's no room for expansion there, and June is less visited by far, so a far less desirable spot. There's simply no easy way around this problem. I'm sure I'm missing some points. In fact, I thought of one while I was editing about how this was during the pandemic, and of course it wouldn't have made a massive difference during the pandemic because all of Fashion Week was online. So actually, these problems that I've listed definitely didn't come from 2020. This came from after they came back from the pandemic, after they came back from doing an online Fashion Week. If they had reverted to what they were doing before, it would have been fine. But as they just continued, it was an astoundingly dumb idea to do so. Well-intentioned, definitely, but clearly not thought through. They should have started with a non-binary day, just as they used to have in Menswear Day at London Fashion Week all of those years ago, and grown it from there, gauging interest, while simultaneously working with designers to either champion a new anchor brand to make people want to come to London for June, or dropping the June admission price significantly to encourage copious young talent to be able to afford their own shows, which could be buzzworthy in itself. Or even, and I just thought of this while editing, they could do one public fashion week in June and then one industry fashion week in September. It'll be a different clientele arriving for the different months, so less worry on expenses, and it also offers brands a different kind of advertising platform. As it was, they're seemingly learning the hard way that this non-binary for all concept perhaps could be improved. This year marks the 40th anniversary of London Fashion Week, and this is some of the hardest campaigning they have done in a very long time. And yet still, the whole June week is suffering because all of the big names like Burberry, Richard Quinn, Simone Rocha are all in September, not June. So why am I saying all of this? Using precious Craig Green analysis time to discuss a misstep from London Fashion Week. Well, it's because since June 2019 for Spring/Summer 2020, Green had not shown in London. At least that was until Autumn/Winter 2022 when he made his return. And I just can't figure out why. I know he's been on the quieter side since the pandemic. It changed a lot of the popular designers really quickly, and according to Google Trends, Craig Green was also affected by that, now seeing buzz similar to where the company was a decade ago in 2014. I should add that isn't bad. It's around the Spring/Summer 15 time when he broke through, so it's not bad. It's just interesting and almost unfortunate that it followed the same trajectory of London Collection's men so exactly, even though he wasn't necessarily there for a good chunk of that. Perhaps, in fact, that is why he's returning. His client may be more on the artistic side, and London is unique in that we're known as the creative ones, the new designers with talent, so maybe it's just right for his client. But the return to London also comes with all of the other London problems. Namely, fabrics are expensive here, mills are far and few, manufacturing is very hard because we don't have anywhere near as big factories as somewhere like Milan, and we don't have the government funding that somewhere like Paris does. Production is really hard in London, and it has been for absolutely decades. As a result, most designers, if they do ever get to the point that they can afford to, leave. Alexander McQueen did, J.W. Anderson did, there's a whole list of people that have left London. Why deal with all of that if you don't have to? The alternative is only seen in designers like Christopher Kane, Christopher Shannon, and Nazir Mazhar, who are all doing their own thing. I think Mazhar specifically is incredibly interesting today, actually, with their fantastic toile shop. But these are the lucky ones with a lasting legacy, because due to the extremely high cost to do business and the more niche designs shown in London, most brands just cannot keep up in a sustainable way and end up closing their companies. Craig Green seemingly isn't yet at a place where his decision is sealed. I should make that very clear. They still have their collaborations, many of which I just didn't name in this video. For example, he did one with the Standard Hotel, 2 with Champion, 1 with the Royal Opera, and Valentino. There's a whole bunch of them, all of which, or most of which, were one-offs, but all help their bottom line. They also have their core products still, and actually Craig personally also took up the teaching position as the new professor of fashion design at the University of Applied Arts Vienna recently. So clearly, it's still very much a choice for him to show in London, so there must be a reason for that. However, when combined with the fact that in 2023 they announced that they'll be showing at their own pace, combining the Spring/Summer 24 and the Autumn/Winter 24 collections to just one, showing in a lookbook at that, it does indicate that he, like Kane, Shannon and Mazhar before him, is looking for something better, more appropriate. In fact, he says this quite explicitly in an interview with High Snobiety, where he says, "The way we work is so reactionary, and sometimes having a strict cutoff point of a show date isn't always ideal," he says. "I like to show things when they're ready. So this year we're showing everything all at once. After our last show, we're thinking about how to celebrate our 10-year anniversary differently and how we could do it with as little stress as possible. I suppose this is how." It seems to me, perhaps, this was not a decision chosen lightly. Creatively, he has expressed his enjoyment for the 6-month turnaround in this interview with Lou Stoppard at Show Studio, and he is still receiving accolades. I mean, just last year he got an MBE. But more than that, eschewing the second autumn-winter fashion week season, despite it doubling the potential promotion, would have been a very hard pill to swallow, as would have the decision to return from Paris, which certainly makes it harder for buyers. But if this is what it takes to allow his work to continue in the direction he wants it to continue in, then I trust him that it's necessary. Fashion is all well and good, but money is what makes it happen, and exhaustion is what makes it stop.
That being said, his recent collection, dubbed Spring 25 by Vogue, seems to be somewhat of a departure from the reliable designs of the previous few collections. It's not a total departure. You can see that this garment is obviously a continuation of these structures, and ponchos have long been a theme as well, as have these kinds of patchwork-esque patterns. But it's clear that a shift is happening in his work. It appears to be a shift from what was workwear-inspired clothing onto more of the craft of the clothing itself, so just a slight shift. While his earlier work was taking inspiration from the workers directly, this is inspiration from the workmanship. Obviously, this is still early days, and in fairness, it is just my interpretation, and you could argue that this shift has been happening for at least a few seasons, with the previous sculptures being made by his furniture maker grandfather, if I'm not mistaken. But it's really only in the repetition of things that we can discern new themes, and it's now that that's become really quite clear to me personally. I'd also like to point out that I think it's interesting timing for this, given the falling search rate and the London Fashion Week not giving him an adequate platform. But I was right in my prediction that he would show off schedule and attempt to do his own thing for exactly that reason. Actually, it's because of that that this video is so late. At the moment, honestly, Craig Green is more loved than London Fashion Week June in general, and I do wonder how that will translate in the future. If he will stick it out in London and show off schedule, or go back to Paris now that the pandemic is over. Also, he could technically stay in London Fashion Week June. Charles Jeffrey has proved that you can really get some press from that week if it's done at a big scale. I equally wonder about how this will affect his developing style. I have to admit the recent collection wasn't my favourite as a group at first. It has grown on me since. I do love elements of it, of course, and these trousers were a real standout to me. But really it was the ideas of the collection that piqued my interest, and I am excited to see where they will go. There are so many new elements, the weaving, the print in this manner, the childlike motifs, these knits, which felt deconstructed in a wholly new way. So there's many new elements to look forward to and interesting future with for the brand creatively. Really, in all, he kind of rode the wave of London Collections men right up until this day, and now is looking for a way to move that forward. They were one of their biggest shining stars in London Collections men's heyday, and now that London Fashion Week June is quieter, so is he. But that also seems to have timed in with a period of change with the brand overall, which he can absolutely use to his advantage if done correctly. It'll certainly be hard, I'm not pretending that it won't be. It's hard to evolve any brand without pushback, but he has got the following, he has the Adidas collab, and he has the core products as well as his new teaching gig, so hopefully he will have time to flesh out these new ideas and find a better platform on which to show his talents. Even in Dover Street Market, which I visited recently, you can see that he is still very well attended by people coming into the store. In my opinion, he's just a bit of a victim of circumstance, both for the pandemic pushing him back and because London Collections Men has been dwindling before it became London Collections June, so he found himself in a tricky place that was completely not really his doing. Of course, if anyone can make this situation work, it's Craig Green. I do hope for the best for him. I hope he manages to turn this new system into something really sustainable for his own self in all of this, because I, for one, really don't want to see the brand go anywhere but up. Thank you so much for watching this video. Please do like and subscribe for more videos like this one. If you're interested in beauty, I do recommend my beauty channel Underskin, which is linked here. And an extra special thank you goes out to my patrons over on Patreon, some of whose names are on the screen now. All content used in this video is done so in accordance with the principles of fair use. However, if you have any concerns, please contact me directly at contact@understitch.co.uk.